Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started in the interest of folks' time. Welcome. This is the Northwest EcoBuilding Guild's monthly education session for July. Welcome, welcome. Today's topic is Electric is Cool, Home Electric Technologies for a Changing Climate and Why They Make Sense. We have a unique monthly education session today for you all in two parts. The first part will be presentations from some guest speakers, breaking down why it is important to electrify homes, how much residential homes are not electrified yet, and talking about the policy in regards to the big picture of home electrification on a massive scale. So looking at big picture stuff, and then breaking it down into the second part of tonight's event into kind of a speed round of presentations in regards to everything from electrifying your construction vehicles, landscaping tools, fireplaces, and more on that later. And I'll go into more detail of all of our speakers we've got tonight. Thank you again so much for joining. And thank you to our event sponsor, Mighty Energy Solutions. So a couple housekeeping items before we begin tonight. Welcome. This event is being recorded, and recordings of this event will be made available to all participants next week via email. There will be a YouTube link that you can access this recording that I will be sending out via Eventbrite. Please, if you can mute your microphones during tonight's presentations to avoid any loud background noise, that's super helpful. There will be question and answer sessions at the end of the first presentation and then at the end of the event. So we'll take a quick breather between the first part of the event and the second part. And then at the end of the event, we'd love to just open it up as long as you'd like for Q&A, discussion, networking, saying hi to folks that you haven't seen in a while, whatever you'd like. So welcome. And when you're posting questions in the chat box, especially, clarifying questions, we might pause the speaker and I can help monitor that chat box as well as several others of our volunteers tonight, just to make sure if there are any, if you have a clarifying question on a term or a vocabulary word or just a concept that's used, just let us know in the chat and then we can work to pause that speaker. Also, if you want to elaborate more on your questions, this is why it is a live event. We love it if you can just unmute yourself, show your face, if you do feel comfortable, and yeah, ask any follow-up or detailed questions you would like. If you are experiencing any technical or logistical issues or challenges, please feel free. I've got my email up and my phone at hand. So if you experience any technical issues during tonight's event, feel free to text or email me at the phone number there. And I will also post it, or I believe I already posted it in the chat as well. So you can find that information there. Well, first thing I'd like to get to tonight is thank our sponsor. Mighty Energy is proud to be tonight's sponsor. We also have a Mighty Energy representative in tonight's event. So if you have any questions, please feel free to chat Geo or stick around after the event is done and you can catch Geo. Thanks so much for joining. As our electricity supply continues to become cleaner, all electric home supplied automatically becomes cleaner as well. An infrared radiant heat is the second most energy efficient electric solution available, just after ductless heat pumps. Standard forced air relies on inefficiently heating air and noisy blowing into the space. You can probably hear mine right now, only to have it rapidly rise above everyone's head. Instead, invisible infrared radiance warms everyone and everything, and it shines silently and directly, just like a sunbeam. This means the walls, floors, and furniture become warmer to the touch and in turn shed this warmth into the air. For more information about infrared radiant heat, check out mightyenergy.net. I'll post that link into our chat as well. And thank you so much again for Mighty Energy Solutions for sponsoring tonight's event. Alrighty, a couple other housekeeping items. We've got some awesome upcoming Guild events and partner events that we'd like to put on everyone's radar. August 19th, we are hosting our third annual Multi-Family Forum event. We've got two panels of awesome speakers from the Low Income Housing Institution, the Homestead Land Trust, a community land trust. We've got folks from the Healthy Homes Tribal Network, the Seattle Building Council, as well as the Housing Authority. So just a great multifamily forum event. We'll be talking about sustainability and housing affordability. August 25th, we've got our Northwest EcoBuilding Guild picnic in person at the Wallingford Playfield. Please come by, bring a snack. And if you are missing seeing folks in person, please join us and feel free to bring masks. And, we will be practicing COVID measures just with the Delta variant. We want to keep folks safe. So we'll be practicing social distancing, but it's still a great time to see folks in person. And then October 13th through the 15th is our Northwest Green Building Slam and Summit. Speaker sessions right now are up for submissions. So please check that out. And I will be putting all those links in the chat as well. We have a couple partner events. I wear two hats. I'm also the Built Green program coordinator, and we are working on our September 16th conference. So please join us for that. It'll be in person at the Linwood Convention Center. And Seattle Colleges at the Wood Technology Center is putting on a great fall residential construction class. And free tuition fees are provided by industry partners you can work with to get those classes waived. So really great programs coming up. And I will put all that information in the chat here in just a minute. Awesome. And I am going to pause for a second. And is Grace on? And would you like to give just a quick little blurb about the Highland Hemp House tour? Grace, are you on?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I can hear you great. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I just wanted to do a really quick, we didn't have time to actually get the slide information in there. So I'm just going to give you an announcement and then put it in the chat. There's a group of us that have been meeting monthly. We're the Hemp Focus Group. And out of that came a desire to tour this house up in Bellingham. It used Hempcrete. They're still sort of finishing it. It's been, it's the home and project of Pamela Bosch, who's a big hemp advocate and enthusiast, you might say. Anyway, she's very passionate about this topic, and there's a lot of stuff to see at that house. So she has granted us a tour of the house, and we'll do a little like networking, brainstorming, that kind of thing afterwards as well. So that is August 11th. It's a Wednesday. It's in 2 weeks. I'll be posting a Google form link in the chat, and that will be your way of RSVPing that you're interested or you want to join us on that. It's Bellingham. So if you're in Seattle, it's going to be a couple hours to get there and back. It'll be an hour or two while we're there. And so I'll post information in the chat. I just wanted to let people know about it because it's completely open to, the Guild community. And while it's not exactly related to tonight's topic, it's everything to do with learning about green building and opportunities and alternatives. So just wanted to put that out there. August 11th.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grace. I appreciate it. Wonderful. And folks can look for that link in the chat. And if you don't know where your chat is, if you just scroll down at the bottom of your screen for those new to Zoom, it's just this little chat bubble, if you will, and underneath it should say chat. Ping me, or you can call or email me if you have any questions about where to find that, and I can send you links on where to find all those using Zoom. Awesome. Thanks again so much, Grace. And if you are interested in becoming a volunteer for these events, we are doing a huge volunteer drive right now. There's so many openings, so many neat opportunities for the Northwest EcoBuilding Guild. If you know of someone who is job searching and needs good letter of recommendations or an internship opportunity, please feel free to pass along my contact information to get involved. The Guild is currently actively seeking a Slam Summit event volunteers to get that ball rolling. So please let me know if you are available, or if you are aware of any apprentices or students or possible interns that need good industry experience, networking, and a good letter of recommendation. Please feel free to send them my contact information, and I'd love to help them get involved. And lastly, consider becoming a member today at the ecobuilding.org. Being a member is a wonderful way to get access to our event replays. We have sustainability forums or building forums for members only, where you can post a question about something quite technical, whether it's in heat pumps or DADUs, and you'll have experts answer them and discuss that topic that you'd like to get some feedback on. There's also member-only resources on our website as well, discounted pricing on all events. We have a code innovations database, and you will also be featured on our Green Pages listing site. So you'll get featured, as well as your company name will be announced. And it's just so much great networking opportunities. I really highly recommend joining today. Our website is ecobuilding.org. And without further ado, super excited to announce our presenters tonight. We have Dylan Plummer. He is a senior campaign representative with Sierra Club, working to advocate for policies supporting building electrification in Oregon and Washington. He is a co-founder and the board secretary of the worker-directed nonprofit climate justice organization, Breach Collective. He is currently based in Eugene, Oregon. And Dylan, we are so happy and grateful to have you tonight. Thank you so much, as well as his partner, Nick Manning, who is the climate program manager at Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. Nick works with groups of health professionals and coalition partners across Washington to elevate the health voice on key climate issues of our state representatives, the media, and the general public. He is currently leading WPSR's campaign to support building decarbonization in Washington state and elsewhere, in congruence with the network of PSR chapters in other states and in Washington, D.C. Nick Manning, it's wonderful to have you as well, and we are so grateful to have you both tonight. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and pass it, do a quick intro of the second set of speakers. We have Albert Rooks with Small Planet Supply, who will be doing a speed presentation on heat pump water heaters and space heaters. We have John Alexander, who will be presenting on holographic electric stoves and electric landscape equipment. We have Brian Cowan with Carlisle Classic Homes, who will be presenting electric construction vehicles. And we have a Lucas Johnson with Valley Homes, who will be presenting on induction stoves and IAQ, indoor air quality. So thank you all so much for joining tonight. And so I'm going to pass it to Dylan Plummer and Nick Manning for your presentations. And Nick and Dylan, I believe I made you co-host, so you should be good to go to share your screen if needed.
All right, are folks able to see my screen all right?
Yes, it looks good. Looking great. It's loading now. Awesome, looks good.
Great. Well, just wanted to say a quick thanks for having us. It's amazing to see all this expertise on one Zoom call, and just looking at the chat already, I'm learning new things. So yeah, just really grateful to be here, and happy to share what I know about these policies and the work that we're doing, and love to hear more about the work that you all are doing on the kind of other end of building electrification. Nick, do you want to take it away for us?
I would love to. And just echoing what Dylan said, I'm really grateful to be here speaking to you all. I think this is a potentially really beneficial ongoing partnership to be had here. So I would love to start a relationship and maybe continue the conversation. But either way, it's great to get the chance to talk to you guys. So thanks for taking the time to be here. We are going to do the context setting mostly. So some of this might be review for many of you. There might be some new tidbits of information you haven't seen before, but generally talking about why we're thinking of decarbonizing the building sector in general from a policy perspective, from a climate perspective, and then maybe zoning in into sort of what's happening at the federal, regional, and statewide and local level. So hopefully we can kind of provide a general overview of the campaigns that we're running. And with that, do you mind starting the first slide, Dylan? Thank you. So starting broadly, why are we talking about gas? Why are we talking about gas in buildings? Yes, this might be reviewed to many of you, but I think it's worth saying anyway, natural gas is a fossil fuel that releases carbon dioxide when it's burned. And now globally and in the US, it drives more carbon pollution growth than coal does. 3/4 of the gas nationwide now comes from fracking, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Water and chemicals are injected into the ground to release shale rock, and then they extract the gas up from the ground, and it can lead to earthquakes, and there's a lot of issues with water contamination. Once the gas is fracked at wells, it's transported through pipelines, through miles of pipelines, where there are frequent releases of methane, which is 84 more times potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So total methane pollution across the US gas operation impacts climate change as much as the annual tailpipe emissions of 70 million cars. So this life cycle emissions, looking at gas's life cycle from the point where it's fracked to the point where it's in our buildings, contributes a huge amount to climate pollution. And in the US, 1/3 of that consumption goes towards buildings, which is what this pie chart here is demonstrating, that the building sector accounts for about 1/3 of the total gas use in the US and is a major driver of that pollution. And actually emissions from buildings increased a full 10% in 2018, driven by gas appliances. So we can see that in the US, gas consumption from buildings makes up a huge portion. Next slide, please. This is kind of a cool stat. I thought it was interesting to put this in here. This demonstrates the benefits of electrifying an average home for the total greenhouse gas portfolio emissions statewide. It's based on a state-by-state building electrification greenhouse gas analysis. Pretty generally a good and huge benefit. There are only 2 states in which it does not provide a benefit, and you can see on the map. But in a lot of places, has the potential to really impact our carbon emissions in a very significant way. And in Washington specifically, thanks to our clean and low-cost electricity, swapping out gas appliances for electric ones would be a huge climate win. So in Washington specifically, reducing the average household's climate footprint by 50% if we swapped out gas appliances for electric appliances, which is the same thing as completely giving up your car. So you can contribute to the solution as much as totally giving up your car by switching out the appliances in your home, in Washington specifically, because of the fact that we have access to a relatively clean and low-cost electrical grid compared to the rest of the US. Next slide, please. So zooming into Washington a little bit more specifically, looking at the trends of gas use in this state and why it's kind of alarming how quickly the use of gas is growing in the state and the total portfolio that it makes up as far as a percentage of our total use going into buildings. So in Washington state, you can see on this graph, but buildings are the single fastest growing source of carbon pollution, and it's up 50% since 1990, now causing 27% of Washington's climate pollution, which is more than the industrial sector, which is 19%, you can see on the graph there. I will note, this comes from gas burned in furnaces, water heaters, stoves, and dryers. So due to gas use in those appliances specifically, we are contributing 27% of our climate pollution by just gas appliances in buildings, and it's growing faster than any other source of climate pollution in the state. Next slide, please. In fact, these are taken from Washington's decarbonization pathway study, which came from the governor's office and identifies various strategies to reach a certain emissions reduction target by 2050, which is that bar chart on the right there, but you can see that electrification is a huge contributor to getting to where we need to be by 2050. It's an essential piece of this puzzle if we're going to actually achieve the emissions reductions that the state has committed to by the time that we've committed to doing it. And then the left here is just another point to reiterate that gas consumption is growing steeply and has been for many years. But according to this study, the lowest cost pathway for achieving commitment to its 80% reductions economy-wide by 2050, which is the actual target, really relies on buildings. Specifically, reducing the residential sector's use of gas by 85% is the target to get to where we need to go as a piece of the larger climate decarbonization pathway in Washington. So this is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle that needs to get figured out soon if we're going to keep on track with what we've promised. Next, please. And that's the climate picture in a nutshell. There's a lot more I could say about that, but I don't want to harp on it. I'm sure you guys are getting information from many sources. So I think I'm going to pivot and talk about what we do as Physicians for Social Responsibility, as an organization that organizes health professionals. We're really concerned about the health impacts. There's a growing body of literature, and it seems like new stats and studies are coming out weekly, attributing really concerning adverse health outcomes to increased use of gas indoors and indoor air pollution. And I mean, in the United States, we estimate that air pollution from buildings specifically contributes to $205 billion in costs annually. And that's healthcare costs, things like lost work days and sick days, all the different impacts that come from being overly exposed to indoor air pollution that might make you sick, make you unable to work. All that aggregate is 205 billion annually, which is an enormous overlooked piece of this issue, I think. And if you go to the next slide, we see that premature deaths attributed to air pollution from buildings are estimated to be over 18,000. In Washington, so homes and buildings are now the largest source of toxic air pollution in the US. And it's linked to a greater number of premature deaths in 2018 than either the power or transportation sectors, according to a study in Nature. And by the way, if I say anything that folks would like to follow up on, if it sounds crazy or where is it coming from, I have references for all these. Please feel free to follow up, and I'm happy to tell you where I'm getting my numbers and where this data comes from. I got resources to share if you are curious to get more into the weeds about some of the actual data. But I say that because of how concerning it sounds and how outlandish this sounds, that buildings are now killing more people annually from indoor air pollution than either power generation or transportation. And transportation has been the big piece that we've been trying to fix for years. And this has kind of sneakily overtaken it in terms of cost to human health and human life. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn to gas stoves specifically. There's 3 appliances that we're really focused on, and it's gas stoves and then space water heaters, space and water heaters. So I'm going to talk about gas stoves first, and then I'll do a little bit on space and water heaters. But very quickly, we found that emissions from gas stoves include that whole list that you can see in the box above the gas stove on the left: nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, ultrafine particles, formaldehyde, all chemicals that have been linked to really dangerous health outcomes in people, and they're listed on this thing. I won't bore you by reading all of them, but we're talking about very serious heart and lung conditions, very serious brain conditions, especially in kids and the elderly. And in fact, homes with gas stoves have 50 to over 400% higher nitrogen oxide levels in their indoor air than homes with electric stoves. And nitrogen oxide has been linked specifically to heart failure and asthma, very empirically. And I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. But then the stoves also emit carbon monoxide, which obviously is a huge problem. Carbon monoxide is an incredibly toxic chemical that we don't want anybody breathing in their home, and it's coming from your stove. So next slide, please. I wanted to put this in here because WPSR and Sierra Club did a study, which, by the way, speaking of references, if anybody wants to get access to this document, I'm happy to give it to you. It kind of outlines our findings for health outcomes attributed to gas stove pollution, indoor air pollution from gas stoves in Washington. But I thought it was worth putting sort of the 8 key findings in here because it frames how we're thinking about this pretty well. And it's, in a nutshell, very unregulated. We are not paying as much attention to indoor air pollution as outdoor air pollution. In fact, levels of indoor air pollution can reach concentration that would be illegal by EPA standards outside. That's regularly documented, largely coming from gas stoves. We know the risks. We've well documented the medical pathways from exposure to outcome, and it's especially damaging to children, lower income households, anybody who's immunocompromised, and aging populations. 2 last pieces: that ventilation is critical, but really what we need is electric cooking to actually transition to a safer and friendlier to the climate system where we're not putting people in our environment at risk. Ventilation is a piece of it, but we found that to really get at these impacts, it requires swapping appliances to electric appliances. Next slide, please. And here's some diving into that study even a little bit more. Here's some of the outcomes that we specifically found, and I thought this was really interesting. Actually, you guys might be curious to see some of these findings on the right there. That data, those data that might be kind of hard to read. I apologize if they're hard to read, but what they're essentially demonstrating is that children who grow up in homes with gas stoves have a 42% increased risk of asthma symptoms, which is very concerning for obvious reasons. In fact, pollution from homes and buildings in Washington, specifically in Washington, accounts for more premature deaths in the state each year than air pollution from any other sector, including industry and roads, according to an MIT study, which again, I'm happy to give to people. So the building sector in Washington accounts for about an estimated 579 of the 848 annual total premature deaths from air pollution across all source sectors, which is about 68% of the total, and 3 times the share of estimated premature deaths due to road transportation sector air pollution and industry. So I should mention that data includes gas and wood smoke being 20% of the total, making up those figures. That's still a huge number. It's extremely concerning as far as premature deaths go and the cost of human life and human health. And we're not really doing anything about it from a policy perspective, specifically in regards to protecting the health of our kids. Next slide, please. Moving to space and water heaters, less documented than gas stoves. I mean, a lot of data and really clear causal pathways have been coming out of studies specifically regarding gas stoves. Space and water heaters, there's more limited data, but I was able to find 2 case studies that I thought might be interesting. In South Australia and in India, there were 2 deaths from carbon monoxide poisoning traced back to faultily installed water heaters. The top is the bathroom, and that really awful looking picture in the bottom, that is classic. This is what carbon monoxide poisoning looks like. The tissue in your heart and lungs turns sort of cherry red. And when doctors see that, it's very obvious what happened. In fact, in the 2 individuals studied in this particular case study, they had levels of 55%. The normal level is about 2 to 4. 5 can kill you. And this is because of the fact that the water heater operating on a pilot light was improperly installed, so it was switched off, but the gas wasn't totally turned off, and that leakage over time leaked carbon monoxide into these individuals' homes until they reached a certain level and died. So clearly there are risks associated with all gas appliances that we need to consider. I mean, just having gas inside and indoor air pollution and not looking at the consequences as closely as we should is a really big concern for us, specifically at WPSR. And that's sort of the health data. I mean, there's more, and I'd love to talk your ear off for as long as you'll let me about how many adverse health outcomes we're associating with gas stoves and water and space heaters, but I think I'll leave it there. I mean, the real take home is that this is now contributing to more health impacts than any other sector in our state and in any other fossil fuel in our state, and is growing faster than any other sector in our state, and is largely unregulated as of yet. With that, I'll give it to Dylan.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for that very sobering overview of the health impacts. It's pretty astonishing. And as a renter myself, who lives in a house with a gas stove, learning all of this stuff has been kind of terrifying, and I think kind of illustrative of the situation that a lot of folks are in our region, which is not having the ability to transition away from gas, even though we have an understanding of the climate and health impacts. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the policy levers for that shortly, but I want to first kind of just start talking about building electrification and what it looks like. So we've heard about all the negative impacts of using gas in buildings, and whether it's to our climate and to our health. And we've heard a lot about the oversight from our different levels of government about regulating these appliances based on those impacts. But there are some really effective means by which to reduce emissions, protect health, and even save households money. So building electrification is a growing movement, as I'm sure many of you all know, and many of you are at the forefront of it, I'm sure. And I just want, this graph is just a helpful kind of illustration as to where a lot of the gas in homes is being used. And so you can see that while cooking has an outsized impact on health, it really is a very small percentage of the carbon emissions related with gas appliances. whereas space heating is the vast majority, followed by water heating. So I think that's just like a kind of helpful graphic, and especially as we start to talk about some of the policies that cities have taken in light of the carbon impacts of the gas appliances, it's informative as well. Some of the kind of compromises that have been made, although when thinking about some of the health impacts, those compromises are less compelling. So that said, clearly, yeah, space heating is where the bulk of the emissions between space heating and water heating. And this is actually something that the presenters that are coming after Nick and myself will likely be able to speak much more articulately to, but to all of the alternatives to gas appliances in homes, ranging from induction stoves, heat pumps, and electric water heaters, all electric appliances that are becoming increasingly inexpensive and increasingly efficient in making the transition away from fossil fuels in buildings that much easier, not only for enthusiasts in clean energy, but also just for folks concerned about their health and safety from these gas appliances. And so, you know, we've heard a lot about how there's very little regulation, but there is a growing movement specifically across the West, and now increasingly across the country and across the world, to take on the gas industry and take on these gas appliances that are polluting our homes and polluting our climate. And so just recently, in the last few years, over 45 cities have adopted all electric building codes. And that all started when Berkeley, California passed regulations on building with gas hookups in new buildings. And within 2 years, dozens of cities in California, cities in Washington, including Seattle, cities like New York City and Denver, all have taken measures to put limitations on building with new gas infrastructure and incentivizing using electric. So 11 states plan for building electrification to help to achieve state climate goals, including Washington and Oregon, which is really exciting. And as I believe Nick mentioned, or will mention, the 2019 Clean Energy Buildings Act in Washington was a great step forward, as was the executive order from the governor in Oregon to limit emissions. And so there's 11 states that are working towards building electrification in multiple different venues, including their public utility commissions. Both Oregon and Washington are both now engaging or about to engage in fact-finding about the future of gas for their public utility commissions. So that's really exciting. And then at the federal level, the Biden administration has made building electrification one of their top climate priorities, and have called to electrify over 1 million homes and schools and end fossil fuel subsidies, both of which would have a tremendous kind of cascading effect for efforts like ours to ensure that folks building new homes, as well as people considering retrofits, had access to affordable and clean electric appliances. So the Biden budget will mean better buildings for all. This was the headline of a recent story that was published, and specifically relating to the American Jobs Plan. It's set to increase funding for the low-income weatherization assistance program, create investments in grants and tax incentives for construction and retrofitting of homes and commercial businesses for efficiency and electrification, and providing funds to support American manufacturing and workforce development in underserved communities. These numbers are still, like the amount of money that's going to be earmarked for these programs is still kind of fluctuating, as we've been hearing about different negotiations happening in Congress over the infrastructure package and the budget. But we've heard optimistic numbers as high as $50 billion set aside for building retrofits, which would include building electrification, which would have a dramatic impact, to say the least, on our efforts in Washington and across the West in electrifying homes and protecting communities' health. Nick, you want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Washington?
Yeah, I'd love to. There's a ton going on, and I'm seeing in the chat people are already kind of starting to talk about some of the things happening. I'm going to start at the state and kind of zoom in. So I'm going to start state and then regional and then local. And this is kind of my laundry list that I tried to make as complete as I can without going too much in the weeds. But that said, like, I'm sure I'm missing some things. That seems like there's a lot of momentum building in various places. But starting at the state level. First thing, HB 1084, House Bill 1084 was proposed in 2021 and died in the House, but two elements of that bill that are beneficial to electrification did pass. The first is the 2021 to 23 Omnibus Operating Appropriations Act, which gives the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, the UTC, funding to examine feasible and practical pathways for investor-owned utilities and natural gas utilities to contribute their share to greenhouse gas emissions reductions as described in state law. So it funds a study for decarbonization pathways for investor-owned utilities, and the UTC is starting to collect stakeholder input on that process. I believe there's a hearing on August 9th, and comments for the first input round are due August 13th, but I can mention that again later if folks are interested in making comments. Other things, talking at the state level, we have, oh, excuse me, I should go into beneficial electrification. This is kind of the other piece that came out of 1084. There was a sort of a perverse incentive in the way that Washington law is written that prohibits utilities from incentivizing customers to switch from gas to electric, but not electric to gas appliances. And so this beneficial electrification study was funded this session to examine how to produce a bill to fix that, to make sure that the incentives written in the state code allow for utility programs to create programs to incentivize customers to switch off of gas into electric appliances. So they got funded for the study, and then the bill that's coming will clarify the ways in which we can do that into amending the language. Colorado just did this too, so we're also looking at Colorado. They had a very strong bill for beneficial electrification that can be used as a sample for Washington. Other statewide things, the commercial energy code updates. So the commercial energy code is updated on a cycle every 3 years. And it's underway right now at the state level to regulate commercial and large multifamily buildings in Washington. Right now it's in a technical advisory group, but they're considering taking changes that were adopted to Seattle's code, which I'll get into in the next slide when I talk about local, and expanding it to the state level. So how can we address fossil fuel use with space and water heating in new large multifamily and commercial buildings? That process happens 3 years, but it's a unique opportunity right now to expand some progress made at a municipal level to the statewide level. And that's happening right now in the advisory group. And then the last thing, Dylan mentioned the Clean Buildings Act in 2019. What it was absolutely a huge step forward. What this did was existing commercial buildings now have to meet certain energy use targets by 2026. So it's more of a energy efficiency bill. And then there was an early adopter incentive program for utilities that did that before the 2026 target to try and incentivize a bit of faster movement on the efficiency of appliances in buildings. So it's an energy efficiency requirement by 2026. Let's zoom in a bit and go to the regional level. This is a really big thing on my plate right now, and I'd love to talk with people about it more if they're curious, but King County is undergoing code updates to its building code in unincorporated King County right now to require heat pump for space and water heating in most uses. It's the same as Seattle's updates, but the difference is it's not all commercial buildings, it's just most commercial buildings. This is moving right now. There's a hearing on the 21st or 25th of August, depending on which subcommittee within the council it goes to, and then it'll be referred to the full committee. It will be in mid-September, mid-October, depending on which meeting they bring it up in. But this is an awesome opportunity to get new construction in unincorporated King County to be electric for large multifamily and most commercial buildings. And then at the local level, there is tons happening. I spend most of my time thinking about municipal and county work that's going on all across the state. And I'll quickly go through my little list here of things that have happened. So in Seattle, they added a chapter to the building codes. We're talking now about how to adjust that to residential. So like I mentioned, King County is adopting what Seattle did, which is new large multifamily. I believe it's, God, I'm not going to say number because I'm going to forget the number of stories and I'm going to get it wrong and somebody's going to correct me. But large multifamily buildings and commercial buildings and new construction have to be built electric. The big question now that we are trying to figure out and parse out is how do we adjust that to be residential buildings too? Because residential, like I mentioned, are a huge piece of the project, and that decarbonization pathway requires reducing residential use by 80% for 2050. So the big question is how do we get around not superseding the state codes and expand these updates, these code updates to residential buildings as well. Tacoma adopted a resolution, the city council did, for decarbonizing new municipal buildings and funded a study for citywide electrification. So a little bit behind Seattle, but still progress and good to see. Olympia is considering the same. So there's actually a resolution in the Olympia City Council right now to do the same thing as Tacoma, which is decarbonizing new municipal buildings and then a study for citywide. Bellingham is considering an ordinance to also implement the code updates that Seattle implemented for new commercial and large multifamily buildings. Vancouver is just now passing a fossil fuel moratorium and is in the process of doing a climate action plan to get commitments, goals from the cities to do electrification. So we're trying to work on influencing the process in this climate action plan to insert specific targets for building electrification. So that's a piece of the plan for the city going forward, in addition to the fossil fuel moratorium that passed. And then Spokane is a whole can of worms. I'm nervous about even really going into this too much, but essentially there's a sustainability action plan being proposed at the city council right now, which is a plan to decarbonize emissions at the city level. And there was a chapter in there that included provisions for building electrification. I think all new buildings by 2023 is what it said, and it's been hugely debated. There's a citizens initiative right now from a union group that would, and essentially it would be a ban on gas bans. It would limit the city's council's power to ban gas appliances. And that vote is in November. The SAP, the Sustainability Action Plan vote, first one is coming up on August 31st. So the big question right now is trying to defeat that citizens initiative and not tie the hands of the Spokane City Council in protecting its citizens for climate and health concerns. And then lastly, one quick thing to mention, there's work at Seattle schools too. Obviously, children's health is a huge concern. And with a lot of what I mentioned about stats for asthma and decarbonizing school buildings is another really big piece of this puzzle for us as folks that focus on the intersection of climate and health specifically. What's happening here is there's work with the Office of the Superintendent to maybe retrofit schools. There's talk about introducing legislation in 2023 that would be a funding package, part of which would include money appropriated to retrofit schools to replace gas appliances with electric appliances. Seattle Public Schools already passed a resolution committing to all school operations being free of fossil fuels by 2040 and committing to new school and or administrative buildings to be built without gas or fossil fuels. So resolution passed, and now the big question, as I'm sure you are all aware, is retrofits. All of this action has to do with new construction, and there's definitely a big piece of the question, which is how do we expand that work on new construction to be all new construction, including residential and not just large multifamily and commercial. But the elephant in the room really is retrofitting, and how do we transform existing infrastructure to transition that from gas to electric, which is a harder lift because that requires money and there are equity concerns. And I'm sure Dylan will talk a bit more about that, but that's kind of where we are. A lot of city action and some things happening at the state level, but really trying to figure out how we can expand what's already happening to get the whole picture and not just a piece by piece of what we can.
Great. Yeah. And so like Nick mentioned, with the opportunities for building electrification policy, there are a number of challenges. And so I think it's really important to kind of understand what the challenges are so that we can kind of better begin to plan for this transition. And so one of the big ones, like Nick mentioned, is equity and ensuring that along the lines of a just transition framework, that the economic kind of burden of transitioning off of fossil fuels is not placed on low income or historically marginalized Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and instead is, to either subsidized by the government or by fees on corporations. And so especially, this is an especially important piece when we're thinking about building electrification, because as our rate base becomes smaller in the gas, folks using gas, those prices will increase dramatically, and they'll likely increase dramatically no matter what, because gas is becoming an increasingly expensive and dangerous fuel. But nonetheless, it's really critical that while we're advocating for policies to electrify our buildings, we're also advocating for policies at all levels of government to create greater protections for communities experiencing disproportionate energy burden. And so there's some really great opportunities associated with that as well, to not only decarbonize our communities and protect our public health, but also to do so in a way that's working to dismantle some of the systemic racism that has led to many inequities in public health and the disproportionate experiences of the climate crisis. There's also just like questions about the upfront costs of the transition to electrification or electric appliances. Nonetheless, we see a lot of these challenges as really, really great opportunities, especially as these conversations become more and more prominent in the federal government, and there's a lot of momentum to channel some of these large federal investments into whole home retrofits and making sure that we're prioritizing the communities on the front lines of the climate crisis and those most vulnerable to air pollution. So, and there's also, of course, the long-term savings associated with electric appliances, which we know are more efficient. So just to kind of reiterate, when we're talking about electrification, it's really critical that we're centering equity and justice. And so we're talking about prioritizing low-income housing and focusing on health, resilience, improved housing, and lowered bills for those communities that rely on that affordable housing, partnering with different environmental justice and equity groups to advocate for policies that not only decarbonize, but also provide buffers for those communities in this transition and support them to transition away from fossil fuels. And we work to avoid displacement, increased rents, and gentrification, the cost of stranded gas assets falling on those who can least afford it, and also locking communities into dangerous gas. We don't want to, leave islands of folks who don't have any kind of exit route. And I think it's also important to note that we don't want to leave any workers without an opportunity to transition their careers. We've heard a lot of kind of opposition to these policies from the pipe fitters union in particular, the union that represents folks that do the majority of the work on installation of gas infrastructure. And it's really critical that in all of the policies that we discuss, we're always including language around creating retraining programs, apprenticeship programs, mandating prevailing wage jobs and union jobs for electrification and retrofits. And I know we're kind of coming up on the end of the time, so I'm just going to maybe rush through some of these. This is just a graph showing the disproportionate impact of air pollution and exposure to air pollutants on different racial identities. And you can clearly see that Asian and Black communities have significant higher proportion of exposure. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, healthy homes are economic. This one fact I think is particularly salient. Energy efficient measures can help Washington avoid $2 billion in energy costs over the next 15 years, especially as we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, or maybe going back into it, hopefully not. it's really, really critical to be thinking about those savings and what those can mean for households that have been already economically impacted. And also considering the medical costs associated that Nick mentioned in the beginning. And I also wanted to point people's attention to this Rocky Mountain Institute study on Seattle. I believe it came out in 2019 or 2020. And it's looking at the 15-year savings. And it shows that building electric can save a homeowner $4,300 in net present costs and 28 tons of CO2 emissions over a 15-year period, which is really significant. So not only is electric building the safe and climate-friendly choice, but it's also a good choice for the pocketbook. And I did want to just hit on this. I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it's always worth talking about. The gas companies are selling us this kind of false promise of renewable natural gas, RNG, biomethane, and sometimes they'll talk about green hydrogen as well, but a little less common, and saying that they're going to be climate friendly in the next 10 or 15 years because they'll have replaced all of the gas in their pipelines with biomethane, which is generated generally by polluting kind of infrastructure like landfills or water treatment plants, or even CAFOs, like mass animal agriculture places. And there are many studies that show that there's no way to even come close to hitting a third of the current demand for gas with renewable natural gas. It's incredibly expensive. There's a lot of environmental justice concerns. But what we know is that the gas industry is not really interested in pursuing renewable natural gas as a viable alternative. They're just interested in using it as like a pretty distraction for policymakers while they continue to expand their gas infrastructure and continue to expand their sales and lock us into a kind of out of control climate crisis and public health crisis as they have been for decades now. So despite what the industry would tell you, the fastest, most equitable means by which to decarbonize our society is not to invest in more CAFOs, sewage treatment plants, landfills, et cetera, but instead it's to electrify everything and transition to clean, renewable energy in our homes. So I'll pass it to Nick to talk a little bit about some action you can take, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll be super fast. I realize that we're over time. Apologies for that. We wouldn't be good advocates though if we didn't give you a preachy "here's how you get involved" slide. So here's our token how to get involved slide. I mentioned all these things. They're kind of coming up. I just wanted to put a couple dates on people's calendars in the case that they wanted to get involved in any sort of testimony, advocacy, or comment writing. Because as people in the building sector, as builders, I mean, you are really a huge missing piece that would help in this discourse enormously, and I can't understate how much that's true. First thing, King County updates. I mentioned we need verbal testimony on the 24th and the 25th when they are hearing the code amendment updates to do something similar to Seattle, but without including all commercial buildings. After that, there'll be more council meetings in September, October. We'll be continuing to engage. I would love to work with people on that. The UTC meeting I mentioned for this decarbonization pathway for investor-owned utilities. They have a meeting on August 9th, and then there's comments due the 13th. That's another thing coming up that is really important for people to get involved with. And then lastly, I want to put Spokane on here just because we really need help. And if anybody is from Spokane or knows anybody from Spokane, we've been asked by the city council to write a con statement to oppose Avista's the big power utility over there, their pro statement for the citizens initiative that's going to be on the ballot in November. And so we're trying to get signers that represent a vast array from different sectors to sign on to our con statement to oppose Avista's pro statement. Basically that we should not limit city council's power to ban gas bans in the future. It's crazy to say ban on bans. And I'll leave it at that because I know we're over time.
And I'll do a quick pitch. So Nick is really focused on Washington. I'm doing a little bit of Oregon and Washington. So if you know of folks or you're based in Oregon and you want to get involved with building electrification advocacy, or are just interested in a more regional focus, please reach out to me and we can get things going, because we've got a number of active campaigns running in cities across Oregon and at the state level. So we need all the help we can get, and we really appreciate all of your expertise. And again, thanks so much for having us, and we can open it up for questions. I know we might not have time, but also dropped our emails in here too if you want to get in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dylan and Nick. And I can also include your references to the documents as well as the resources you were mentioning in my follow-up email to our participants today, next week. That will include a recording to this event as well as any links to resources or tools and documents you might have. Awesome. We are a little short on time, so I am going to limit it maybe to one open-ended question. If anyone wants to turn on their mic or their camera or both, feel free to ask a question. We'll just do one. However, do remember we have plenty of time at the end of today's full event, that we can get to specific questions as well.
I think it would be good for George to ask that question he asked on chat, because that was a good chain that went with that. George, could you repeat your original question?
Oh, Gio, you're on mute.
Contractor? Do you have a like a rapid response network or citizens lobby kind of thing, helping us out, knowing who to call and write and email and about what and when, that kind of stuff?
So I can speak for the Sierra Club. We, if you're part of our like Washington list, we'll send out kind of like action alerts and updates around, ways to get involved. And I imagine Nick, if probably the same for Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, easy way, just sign up for the email list and follow us on social media.
Okay.
But I will say that Nick and I were just talking. In California, they have like a listserv where they're including like green building advocates, even like local governmental staffers and politicians and nonprofit advocates. And we just did a great like venue to share information about where different campaigns are and the newest, induction stove and kind of everything in between. So I'm really interested in maybe facilitating something like that happening in Washington, and or Pacific Northwest kind of regional focus. And that might be another great opportunity for like sharing information, kind of hot points for advocacy and weighing in.
Right. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Dylan. And thank you, Nick. Thank you both so much for that awesome presentation. Greatly appreciate it. And it's wonderful to get to meet you both. And yes, let's continue this relationship. I look forward to learning more and seeing where these policies take us. Awesome. So without further ado, we've got Lucas up next. We're going to start our series of kind of quick micro presentations, about 5 to 10 minutes long, on specific topics in regards to electrifying homes. So Lucas, I'll let you take it away on induction stoves and IAQ. And I do believe if you have any presentation, you should be able to share your screen. I believe I made you a co-host. So
yeah, I'll share it. Let's make sure this works right now.
And I'll set my fun little timer here.
Yep. All right. I know we're going to be quick and snappy in this section. People who know me know I love building science, and they know I'm long-winded. So quick and snappy is not my style, but we will do it. So we're going to focus on good building and good cooking, things I deeply care about, both of those. And yep, my name's Lucas Johnson. I guess my title's the Chief Building Nerd at Valley Homes. So who am I? Don't have much time to get into all this, but I'm a science nerd first and foremost. I'm stoked about life. I want to protect it. And I view myself as a campaigner personality. I like to promote things for the good of our future, including people, buildings, and the natural world. How can all three of those things be in harmony, right? I'm really proud to have joined as a board member of the EcoBuilding Guild. I've been involved with the organization for well over a decade now, and I am a partner at Valley Homes. I'm actually based in Tucson, Arizona most of the time, but I guess the Guild's how I stay connected with my homeland. So our Valley process focuses around what we call good building, we focus on having a calm process, trying to enjoy the work we do and be flexible and all that good stuff, and turning what's usually viewed as costs into hopefully ideally viewed as smart investments. Normally this is like 10 minutes of explanation, but I'll leave it there. Good building, what is that, you ask? If you haven't seen this before, we've broken it down to 5 factors that have a ton of different sub-factors, of course. But effectively, we're in the decision-making processes that we've done. We're looking at comfort and health, efficiency and renewables, durability and resiliency, social equity and embodied injustice, life cycle carbon impact. Like those are the 5 main things that we're looking at in decision-making processes we've done. This has been a powerful methodology, so we're hoping to turn this into an open source design tool that anyone can use through my relationship with the Guild and all that. Hopefully this can become a Guild product or something like that. I hope to share this system, this thought process, because in 20 years of doing this work, I haven't found a conversation tool that's more effective in getting people to kind of see the whole system and make the right decisions. So I decided to apply it to cooking, a conversation we have all the time with clients. It feels like stoves are the last bastion of gas inside homes. People are like, I'm a cook, I have to have this gas stove. And it's like, really? You don't. Like, it turns out most cooks are moving towards induction anyway. But there's also a whole freaking horrible life cycle you're tying yourself into by choosing to have gas in your home, right? And a lot of people do all electric but a gas stove. Cool, step in the right direction, but you're still tied into this system, right? Like I chose this dangers of fracking thing because it was the scariest looking thing I could find. But my point is, you're inextricably tied into a system that has tremendously high carbon impact. Natural gas cannot become carbon neutral, right? It doesn't matter if an appliance is relatively energy efficient, if it's powered by an incredibly inefficient and harmful life cycle. In other words, natural gas is just a slightly less bad way to stay hooked on fossil fuels, right? It keeps you hooked if you use it that way. And guess what? Social justice and durability, right? 2 other factors. A high impact life cycle also usually means that it's very harmful to people who discover, harvest, process, provide, and maintain the product, right? There's a lot of people who are very deeply harmed in the life cycle of getting and using gas, right? There isn't a ton of data I could find yet on relative durability of electric versus induction versus gas stoves. They all require some maintenance and proper use and proper care, and of course that kind of stuff. They're sensitive appliances, all of them. But what we do know, as I was saying before, is that gas stoves are powered by an industry that is not durable. Like we can't keep doing this, right? Whereas electric options can be decoupled from high impact fuel sources. So we need to do electric options. Health, right? Natural gas decreases overall indoor air quality. Thank you so much, Nick. We're going to need to talk. I'm fascinated by learning more about the data you have on this. It's kind of hard to find a lot of publicly available data in this area, but it's very clear that natural gas is adding pollution to your building. If you go camping, you're using natural gas basically in a stove that says do not light this indoors. Yet we put a giant, 300,000 BTU Wolf massive stove in our house that requires, ventilation hood that could suck a cat off the ground in order to remove that amount of pollution and think that, oh, we're doing something that's worth doing, that's safe, that's healthy, that's going to be good for us. It's kind of a crazy thing. But what the data shows is that no matter what stove you use, electric, induction, gas, what you do need is a well-designed kitchen hood and a good continuous whole house balanced ventilation system, ideally with heat recovery, so we're not wasting a bunch of energy to create good air quality. So what you can see here is that the kitchen hood looks almost identical in either of these setups, either with a gas setup or a electric setup. You still kind of end up with effectively the same utility, right? There are some emerging concerns about induction stoves and the degree of EMF they put off. Everything I've found was not really sufficiently scientific is the way that I would put it. But there are some good points to consider about exposure to EMFs in general, especially as we move towards electric houses. And a stove's a large appliance. It's going to have some degree of electric power, right? And that can be bad for us. But is it really that bad? And is it worse than any of the other options we have, right? Interesting things to think about. And comfort, another one of the things we always consider. These are thermal images from my mom's house during the heat dome when it got to over 99-degree air temp inside her house because she doesn't have air conditioning. And, you know, just trying to stay cool was a very, very, very challenging thing. But she'd actually just switched out to an induction stove, which she loves. She's, you know, very, very passionate about cooking. Views induction as an upgrade that she did purely just because she prefers to cook on that. But it turns out we could also cook comfortably on it, even when it was over 90 degrees inside, because the stove isn't putting off a ton of heat, right? This image in the middle, this like blurry craziness in the front there, that's a gas stove putting off a bunch of waste heat, right? Not great. And all of the pollution and other stuff that's coming off of it, all the horrible air quality, all the life cycle violence that you're tied into, all of that, right? It's kind of an appropriate looking thing. It looks like a furnace or something, right? In the back, that's an induction stove operating to also cook food. And it just goes to show the level of waste heat from the two different things, right? If we look at waste heat as modern technology advancing or whatever, clearly induction stove is what is part of a modern good building. They're also quite expensive. You can find less expensive ones. I've had a really hard time finding like a lower cost middle market one that's good quality and well reviewed. And if you find one, please put it in the comments, let me know, because seriously, that's like the next thing that we want to buy. Currently we have a standard electric, but we're very, very interested in going to induction. We dream of stuff like this. This is more like an $8,000 thing. But my point is, they're a beautiful thing that's part of a modern good home. It's not some sacrifice we're making. There's also a great way to get started if you don't have the budget to drop like $8 grand on a stove, which I certainly don't. You can get an induction hot plate, which is you know, a little thing you plug in and you can start cooking on it. And these things are getting incredibly sophisticated. I was cracking up earlier when I found this one that is controlled by Bluetooth and has all these different like algorithmic settings for different meats and temperature sensors in the pan. And it just, anyway, it's kind of fun where this technology is going and what it opens up as far as cooking options. Because I'm very, very passionate about my food and cooking, my wife as well. This is our house in Tucson, just to wrap this up. And since we couldn't afford induction, as I mentioned, we ended up with a standard electric stove. And we feel like that's pretty cool too, because it's powered by our solar. There's actually a whole nother set of solar on the other side above the kitchen there. And, you know, we cook perfectly good food on it. It's wonderful. We enjoy it. And every once in a while, we want a little bit of char. So we throw it on our small little grill in the backyard and we can get our natural gas char that we want occasionally. And it's a very, very low impact way to do that. That doesn't mean we need to have natural gas piped into our house, ruining the planet. So in short, you can cook really good food, have a really good building, but you can't do that with natural gas. You got to do that with all electric and all in there.
Thank you so much, Lucas. That was perfect timing.
Wow,
Awesome.
that's amazing for me.
You had 13 seconds left. Awesome job. And thank you so much for that presentation. That was great.
Oh, and here's, if you want to get in touch with us, this is our contact info. There we go. So I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucas. And yes, I can provide your contact information and resources in the follow-up email as well to participants via Eventbrite.
All right. Well, I'll disappear for a bit and stick around for the panel later. Look forward to what everyone else has to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up, we've got Albert Rooks, who will be presenting on heat pump water heaters and space heaters. Hey, Albert.
Hi there.
Awesome. And looks like
there's a slide.
Oh, perfect. Looks great.
Great. You know, in this day and age, this is not my first Zoom meeting. So hi, everybody. Lovely to see you, read your names, read the chat. Wonderful, wonderful. My name is Albert Rooks. I work for a company called Small Planet Supply. And Small Planet Supply is a company that is a building material supplier, mechanical products, and building envelope products, really tailored for low carbon, low health. We have, I think, I'll say 99% of the product would qualify for a red list free label. The mechanical stuff sometimes gets tricky on the printed circuit boards and so forth. So generally healthy products, be it envelope products or mechanical products. And something typically we're always after some kind of high efficiency. And so we started kind of working around the passive house world and so forth. So efficiency is really a passion of ours. One of the, if I can figure out how to advance my slides now, there we go. One of the things that we're going to talk about today are just heat pumps in general. Heat pumps and space heating, water heating, and things like that. So just a real simple recap just to set the stage. Heat pumps are ways that we can move energy around using electricity and no combustion. There are new heat pumps in development in various parts of the country that do have a combustion cycle in them. It's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about heat pumps that are taking outside ambient temperatures and running them across a coil to gather that temperature and place it on to a refrigerant, which is going to run around a cycle, a refrigeration cycle. It's going to be compressed and then expanded. The compression happens anywhere from, a few hundred PSI to 1400 or 1600 PSI, depending on the particular heat pump that it is. And so kind of a couple of things happen. We use electricity and ambient airflow to gather a little bit of heat outside. And even when it's very, very cold to us, that's really meaningful heat to a heat pump. And we'll put that heat onto a refrigerant, and then we'll compress the refrigerant and send it down a row. And as it gets expanded, then its density changes and it throws off any heat that it might have collected in the compression cycle. And so it just, what we're doing is we're using a little bit of ambient energy and electricity in a pump, a compressor, there's the word I'm looking for, and then some kind of a pump that's moving the refrigerant around, and in some cases the refrigerant is water. The refrigerant generally starts as a gas, gets compressed, takes on a lot of density, changes phase into a liquid, and then reverses its cycle. And in that way, when it's under compression, it has one basis of energy. And then when it's expanded, it releases that basis of energy. And all we're doing between wintertime in heating mode on the right-hand side of the screen and summertime in cooling mode is just changing the direction of the refrigerant flow. So in some cases, we'll be expanding on the inside of the home, and in some cases, we'll be expanding on the outside of the home. In both cases, that little unit on the outside is going to be kind of collecting some of the heat or lack of heat from the home and then blasting it out the top of the unit in that chimney across that fan. So you just got a little air cycle of the red arrows running in the cooling cycle, ambient energy coming in and going out the top, while a refrigerant gets kind of pushed to the inside and pulled back on the outside and goes through an expansion. And there we go. We can provide lots of heat without burning any combustion gas, and we can cool homes. So that's really the trend that we're looking for in electrification. And we can do most functions in a building using this basic refrigeration concept. When we talked about this meeting, I was to kind of talk about it from a personal standpoint, so our company began becoming interested in taking on a number of heat pump products. And so we did. We took on a new line that is made in China and is made by a company called Midea. And this is just kind of context stage and why we're doing what we're doing and what people can choose to do and products they can use. There's lots of really good ductless mini splits. There's lots of great ones by many, many companies. The one thing I like about this one, the reason that we chose to work with this one is that outline in red. That's an efficiency rating in a cooling application. And below it, where it says 14.5, that's an efficiency rating in a heating application. And usually in the industry, when we go around and we look at ductless mini split applications, really good ones, we'd see that 40 number would be more like maybe 22, 24, something like that. And so when that turns into a 40, that's really, really, really high. And that basically means we're going to need a lot less electric energy to do the same amount of BTU hour cooling in this appliance than we would with one that is 20 or 22. And fortunately, here in the Pacific Northwest, we have rebates that are offered by Bonneville Power Administration and serviced through the utilities, that if we buy one of these systems, whatever brand it is, doesn't matter, as long as it has a certain level of efficiency, we get a very meaningful rebate on the installation cost of that appliance. And so that's really a good thing. The cool thing about this is that it's really, really very efficient. But we always want to think about, when we're using heat pumps, the right tool for the right application. So because this is really super efficient, I would look at this and immediately think of one of my really super efficient building envelopes and try to plug it in there. But the funny thing is, all these things are different. They take a little bit of consideration and consultation with someone, because this particular one is tuned to be very efficient, and it also will work in very, very cold climates. Like, it still has, I think it's 75 to 78% of its capacity at minus 25 Celsius, which is a really big deal, especially for a unit with this kind of refrigerant. In any case, the other side of this is it won't slow down very much. If we put it in a very, very efficient house and we set it to cool, it's going to cool a lot. It won't cool a little. And that's a thing called a turn down rate. These are all important things to think about mini splits, but ductless mini splits are a super great thing to do right now. There's transitions going on with the refrigerants that are being used, which brings me to the next one. This is one that we're just onboarding right now. This is a company, it's a North American company from the East Coast USA called SpacePack. And I'm interested in 3 of their units. The 2 units are shown right here. And I'm interested in, because usually these kind of North American R410A monoblock heat pumps like SpacePack, Chiltrix, or something like that are generally don't have inverters. They're a little bit, kind of power on and power off. So they're not really very good at feathering the loads in and feathering the loads out. This is a really good, efficient inverter technology. And this particular series of heat pumps will work in very cold climates, much colder than we'd experience in Western Washington. They'll work fine in Eastern Washington. And then if we're in a colder area like Northern Idaho or something like that, or Eastern Northern Idaho, where it gets really quite cold, there's even a colder climate also. So the last one we looked at is a mini split. And the way these mini splits work is we plug a whole bunch of piping around the house carrying the refrigerant, and that's what kind of delivers that transition. This is much like the next heat pump we're going to look at. This uses water as the refrigerant line. So we're not running kind of this high global warming refrigerant around the house, and it still does all the basic functions of a heat pump and delivers over here with a high wall head or a fan coil on a low wall right over there also. So next thing we're going to look at is really the Sanco 2 water heater. This is really one of the early products that we started with. It's really an exciting product. and it's capable of heating all the domestic hot water for a small single family home. You can also heat a very small home while you're making all your domestic hot water. But the cool thing for electrification is that through a few years of research with Bonneville Power Administration and Ecotope in Seattle and a bunch of utilities in California, we've managed to find a way to gang all these water heaters together with some very large tanks and take on all the domestic hot water of very large buildings. Here's one in downtown Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, 27-floor office building that we just switched from natural gas over to this heat pump cycle. How are we doing
You
on
have
time?
1 minute left.
Great. So the nice part of this is that we can handle single family buildings in space heating, water heating and then also handle very large buildings, all with heat pumps. And heat pumps are really very simple devices. And from that standpoint, we've got some really good tools to work with. How about if I turn it over there, Nina?
Oh, sounds great. Thank you so much, Albert. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Next, we'll have John Alexander. John, if you're ready to present, that we'll be talking about tonight in regards to holographic electric stoves, as well as, and fireplaces, as well as electric landscape equipment.
Nice.
Awesome, John. Your slide looks good. I just don't think we can hear you. Are you unmuted?
You talk.
There you go.
Okay. And then my presentation, slideshow. In the beginning. There we go. Okay. I'm good to go. Thank you, everybody. I'm giving 2 different presentations. The first one will be about holographic and non-holographic electric fireplaces and stoves. And this presentation was actually prepared by Brian Cloward, who's an architect who has a passion about it, and he unfortunately was not able to attend tonight. So I was gifted this presentation this afternoon to be able to present it tonight. Plenty advanced. And so I'm also interested in this subject as well. I'd never even heard of electric stoves, electric fireplaces that are super sophisticated, that are actually holographic, until we started researching for this meeting. And it's a very interesting type of thing. These stoves they have several major advantages over gas and wood stoves. One is, of course, indoor air quality. We've all talked about gas with cooktops and heat sources, and certainly gas fireplaces are a problem as well. Wood fireplaces are even worse for indoor air quality. The small particulate that goes throughout the house into our lungs is a particularly bad thing. So these electric fireplaces have absolutely no effect on indoor air quality, at least that I know of. They also use no fossil fuels, unless of course your source of electricity is from fossil fuels in Ohio or something like that, but not so much here. They require no flues whatsoever. And they have a number of very interesting features. They run in cost, they vary quite a bit. Depending on what you get. They run in cost from $200 for very affordable for small spaces, all the way up to $5,000. And what Brian says is you kind of get what you pay for. The most realistic ones are unfortunately the more expensive ones, and they are remarkably realistic through smoke and mirrors or water vapor and mirrors and holographs and all kinds of different projections and all kinds of manners of simulating wood fires. You have the option with these wood fireplaces of having ones that can produce heat or not produce heat. The less expensive ones don't produce heat. So it can be a serious source of radiant heat in a room, just like any electric heater. And you can also have sound effects with it. You can have realistic little crackles going on with it as the fire is going. And you have little embers coming up from the fire and it's moving around, and many of them are very sophisticated in all the different options that you can do with them. So the question is, why? Why would we have electric fireplaces? There's certainly many reasons not to have gas and wood fireplaces, but why have electric ones? Well, in my mind, you know, we as Homo sapiens evolved for many of our tens of thousands or millions of years as hunters and gatherers. And as hunter and gatherers, at night having a fire was a very important thing for community, for cooking, and really for safety, for keeping predators away, or being able to see predators, or keeping other tribal groups away and things like that. So I think we've evolved that fire is something that's deeply comforting for us and is a very nice thing for aesthetics. And some people enjoy just watching a fire or having it as a background type of thing. So this gives people an opportunity of a no fossil fuel fire, kind of an interesting concept in my mind. So Brian wanted me to tell people that for some people may be concerned where these things are regulated in the building code. He believes that they're regulated as electric heating and cooling appliances. So that would be chapter 14 in the heating and cooling equipment section of that. And he says it's just a little bit fuzzy exactly how they are warranted, how they are regulated in that. So there's a zillion different options for different stoves, zillion different ways, doing small places, big places. You can mount a TV over it if one is so inclined and not destroy your TV up there. You can have it in small little rooms, small little apartments, and affordable. I once saw someone from the guild long ago who had a $25 electric fireplace in his insert into his fireplace that looked totally comic and amusing, but it was very affordable and very energy efficient. I think it was less than 25 watts at that time. So lots of different options. These are the interesting little things that are part of the way that it's simulated how they actually work. Little details on it. And here's the less expensive options for it. And so then here's some very high-end options. And last, here's an option that I've seen in an elder person's place as well. That looks kind of, adds some atmosphere if one likes that. So that's one thing. So I want to move on to my next part of my presentation. And that's, talking about electric landscape tools, which is very unrelated to fireplaces. But electric landscape tools are a big issue. Many landscape tours, we've all heard of gas leaf blowers. They're really loud. And they're generally done as two-stroke engines. Two-stroke engines are usually used in chainsaws, leaf blowers, lawnmowers, gas lawnmowers, and a number of different things. They have many different advantages. They're also pruners. Wow, I didn't know this actually is going to move. Pretty cool. They're lighter, they're simpler, they're less expensive, and can be used in any orientation. Four-stroke motors are what we have for automobiles and trucks. And you can't really turn them on their side or upside down and work. They're also two-stroke engines are much more power than four-stroke per weight, per energy density. Disadvantage is they're loud and they're remarkably polluting. In this little system, they don't have a separate lubrication. The oil is mixed in with the gasoline. And that anytime you're burning oil, you're polluting a lot out into the air. And in this system, the way the simplicity has it, some of the fuel is actually being emitted as well, unburned. Very inefficient. So when we get into electric leaf blowers, here's my show and tell. I have my little electric leaf blower, which has some sound to it for sure. And since I have many different Makita tools, it works super well. And is I bought it for the job for cleaning out table saws, but it's become very useful at home for cleaning leaves off sidewalks and stairs and things like that. And in fact, has become so popular it may not make it to the job, but we'll see. And then this is another one in the bottom right-hand corner. This is an electric leaf blower that I have that I bought for the job a few years ago. That's just phenomenally powerful and is electric, lightweight, and very low cost. It's been an amazingly useful tool for at home blowing around leaves when I'm too lazy to rake, or blowing sawdust around the job site when I'm trying to clear off an area, or blowing sawdust off a worker when they're trying to clean up after the end of the day. Many different uses. Lawnmowers. This one in the bottom right-hand corner is my 20-year-old old Black & Decker electrical lawnmower that's still working darn well and mulches the grass. It puts it into the grass, works very well. You can get seated lawnmowers. You can get ones that are corded like mine. I like it because it's so lightweight and so easy to on and off. Or you can get battery pack ones, certainly, as well as an option. Hedge trimmers, lots of different hedge trimmers that are all electric, either on a cord or electric powered with a battery. Ones work very, very well. You can get little edge trimmers as well that are electric, work well. Chainsaws, we all hear chainsaws around our neighborhoods, the 2-stroke chainsaws that are polluting bad and louder and heck. Well, electric chainsaws work pretty darn well as well, either battery packed or electric. This is my Sawzall. I use this trimmer blade, which is super sharp and works super well for cutting. I cut a branch on the job that was 6 inches in diameter today, and it just zips through it pretty fast. Not as fast as the chainsaw, but works very well. And this Sawzall is just as powerful as my corded Sawzall and works super well for many different trimming projects at home and at the job. Then there's pole saws, of course, many different types of pole saw and remote trimmers that you can get that are all electric, work very well. And then my last slide is talking about the larger tools that we can use for landscaping. Case in the bottom left-hand corner came out with the first electric backhoe. And they say in their YouTube about it that it's more expensive than gas backhoes, but it pays for itself in about 5 years at break-even point, in saved maintenance, in saved fuel, and save a lot of other troubles. Then the bottom right-hand corner, just a little mini backhoe that Bobcat has, many different brands along those lines. And then up at the top is a 26-ton, 300 kWh battery pack Caterpillar excavator, huge, something that the Norwegians have been using quite a bit, and there are incredible pioneers in uses of electric tools up there, and electric vehicles, highest penetration of electric vehicles of any country in the world at this point. So that's just my quick synopsis of electric tools for landscape, and I'm ready to go on to the next speaker. Thank you.
That was wonderful, John. Thank you so much. Awesome. Our next speaker tonight is going to be Brian Cowan with Carlisle Classic Homes, talking about kind of a great transition to electric construction vehicles. Thanks, Brian, for joining us tonight.
No problem. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of really neat information out there about electric trucks. I spent mostly just a lot of time on YouTube. There's kind of equal parts fact and speculation about what some of these vehicles are going to be and what their features are going to be. But I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple really cool things about a couple neat vehicles. But definitely anyone could spend a lot of time doing a deep dive on YouTube to really see what all is out there. So the Bollinger B2 is a pretty exciting one. One unique feature about this is that you can actually pass a 16-foot board through the truck with the tailgate closed. So a lot of these cars have been kind of reconfigured to have storage compartments in the engine bay. And this truck kind of utilizes that and the tailgate and the whole car to be able to, put something really long in there for transport. So it's a class 3 medium truck, like a Dodge 3500. So a pretty powerful truck, estimated to come out at about $125,000 with a 200-mile range. They have a little bigger battery pack than the Tesla. And it takes a long time to charge if you're doing like a level 2 charge, so like 8 to 10 hours. The Tesla Cybertruck is kind of the one that made got a lot of attention early on. So they came out with some big claims about being able to pull 14,000 pounds and being bulletproof. They also had a kind of showcase the ability of the truck by doing kind of a tug of war contest with an F-150. And the Tesla did really good. However, there's a lot of critics of that comparison. One thing to note is that the F-150 was only a 2-wheel drive. So the Tesla was able to beat it pretty handedly. Allegedly armored glass, although at the unveiling, there was kind of a demonstration to throw a rock at it or a bowling ball at it, and it cracked the glass. The Rivian R1T is coming out at about $75,000, 300-mile range. This has some cool storage options in like a drainable compartment that's kind of under the rear seats. So you could put like, they talked about putting snowboards in there, but anything that's, kind of tool related, it'd be great tool storage. It also has an onboard compressor in the bed of 1500 PSI and some vegan leather for the seats and everything. So Chevy Silverado is coming out with something. This is the vehicle I've been able to find kind of the least information on. They're saying 2023, 2024. So it's going to be a bit behind what everyone else is offering. And no pricing information yet. The Hummer H2, it's particularly quick out of all the trucks, 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, $80K price tag. And it has rear and front motors. So some of these have 4 motors, some of them have 2. This one has one with 2. Arrival brand. So this startup company is kind of based on it's a couple of these other cars too are kind of a platform where they kind of design the kind of powertrain and they call it a skateboard concept. So then you can kind of put modular things on it. So this is one that UPS is going to have a bunch of them for their kind of what they call their last mile deliveries. So they're not going to be driving kind of cross country, but kind of operating locally. And these are to be produced in Charlotte, North Carolina. And UPS is projected to meet its zero emissions goal ahead of the Postal Service. And then these are kind of the more exciting ones. Canoe. So this is, you can kind of expand from a 6 to an 8 foot bed. Has a bunch of different charging ports and kind of fold down tables, very customizable, a really interesting cockpit, a bunch of interior storage. They have an interior secure toolbox option that you can lock it. And one of their neat philosophies is that it's built for the second owner, meaning that, you know, you can buy a used one and make it kind of uniquely to you. The Ford Lightning is kind of the biggest, most exciting one for our area, just because it's going to be, you know, more locally produced, and it has a big following here. And so it's a lot of these ones, you can charge them from the, use them to charge your house. So this is kind of what Ford is kind of showing of how it works. And then the last one is this e-Bussy. This is a modular truck that can be customized. There's 9 or 10 different models, solar rooftop power. Max speed is 100 kilometers per hour, so 62 miles per hour. And what's really cool is you can share it via an app. So you can just have someone come and use your vehicle by logging in with an app. So they have a passenger van, a panel van, box truck, pickup truck, wagon, convertible, camper van. Yeah, and then here's some article that I found, but there's a bunch of neat stuff out there for resources. So.
Thanks, Brian. Some of those look really cool. Some fun models out there. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
Great, and we have one more presentation tonight. I'm going to give the floor back to Albert to provide us a case study on just how he went all electric at his own home. So Albert, I'll go ahead and give you the floor again for a couple minutes, and we'll wrap it up with Q&A.
Great. I really want that camper. That looked really pretty cool. So yeah, thanks everybody. Just a little quick wrap up on myself. As we were kind of talking about this session, everyone was talking about, you know, heat pumps and really gas cooking and things like that. And I had just the weekend before, I'm still sore from it, but had removed almost all of the gas out of my home. It's a home that's a bit new to me. It's older, you know, so a couple of additions on it. But when I got here, started working on kind of retrofit stuff, and removing gas was a primary thing. I just got one appliance left to go, which is a fireplace insert. And now I've got a new understanding of electric fireplaces that I can kind of consider for that application. So just a quick share that for me, and I really work a desk anymore, this is super easy. So I just started replacing the appliances, and yeah, I kind of work with water heaters and stuff like that. But I'm just not that great. You know, I wouldn't hire me to install my water heater. I'd get somebody way better than me. All I did was kind of work through the applications, and that was the water heater on the right-hand side of your screen. And on the left-hand side of the screen was the little gas valve behind this gas range on the right-hand side of the screen. So in this particular circumstance, the house already had a central heat pump that had replaced an original oil burning central heating system. And I wound up removing the central heat pump in favor of a more efficient heat pump strategy, and was able to reuse the ducting after removing the heat pump to run ventilation tubing to deliver kind of fresh air and pull air out of the bath and things like that, kind of in the way that they were talking about after the Harvard studies earlier in the top of the session today. Also, the Harvard studies really did talk about gas cooking, which is really why we made that change. Also, to be able to remove the meter at the end of the project. And we wanted to remove the water heater with a heat pump water heater, because I've worked around those for quite a long time. And really, there's no more reason to have a gas dryer from a building envelope standpoint. Even in a really old building like mine, a gas water heater has that duct going out through the wall. It's a vented dryer. It's just the worst idea in a building that we could do, because that's just a 4-inch hole in the building, right? And kind of new buildings and theories about airtightness and lowering the loads are all about airtightness. So it's great to get rid of these. And what I replaced them with was really pretty simple. Heat pump water heater. There's lots of different styles. It could be this one. It could be 2 or 3 unitary styles that you can find at Home Depot or your plumber can get for you. The center is my second heat pump dryer. And it's the second one because this is kind of the second house I've retrofitted and moved to heat pumps. And then on the right-hand side, there was a little discussion about this one. I got this at my local appliance shop, just a family-owned business. And I got it because it had those knobs that look like the old gas cooktop. And it was $3,600. The first one I got, I think we were trading chats in the channel with George. The first one I got was great. It's still working great in the home that it is working in. And I got it at IKEA for like $1,100-1,200 or something like that. And all you do is you get the appropriate cookware, which has the right quality of steel to make the induction activity working. I don't know how to explain that quite well, but it works really, really well. And somebody did ask about total kilowatt hours of an induction range. I can't speak to that, but I did in this last project, the house was fully metered. And when I boiled water, I was frying an egg and I set it on medium high and it was burning 500 watts of electricity at that point for the duration that I was cooking, which is super low, right? An electric resistance would be using way more than that. And gas, of course, is going to be producing a lot more heat, and we're going to be breathing the combustion gases, and we're using a fuel that we really, really need to get out of. So in the end, this was super doable for me. And I had an addition. So they ran the gas pipe on the outside of the house to get to the gas range, drilled a hole through the wall. And at the end, there was a little celebration because, yeah, I had removed most of the gas, but also the champagne that we literally uncorked, I used because it fit the diameter of the hole in the outside of the wall perfectly. Drove it in with a hammer, my hole in the wall sealed. I'm using the champagne cork. And boy, you got more holes, open more champagne. So anyway, that's it for me. And one more appliance to go, and then we'll remove the meter.
That's great. Thank you so much, Albert.
Most welcome.
I love your champagne cork hole.
I was really, really happy with it too. I like cork. I've got a long history with cork. So anytime I can use cork is fun. So thank you.
That is wonderful. Yes. Well, we'll open it up to the floor now for some questions and discussion. I'm going to sift through the chat. So there were some great questions coming in that may have not gotten answered quite yet. And please, this is a great time if you feel comfortable turning on your camera, on your microphones, saying hello, and yeah, just becoming involved in some group discussion here. And that's why we have these, events live, not pre-recorded like a video, so you can interact with the speakers tonight. So please feel free to ask any questions you might have, and I'll keep sifting through the chat and see if there was any unanswered topics we can get to as well.
Hey Albert, I got a question about what do you think the budget is for going from all gas appliances to all electric?
Well, I
Cost
tell you
in
that
ballpark.
range was a lot less money than whoever purchased that gas range. Those are super ridiculously expensive. And they're, you know, I'm a bad cook, but to anybody that's a reasonable cook, they're really a blunt tool. So I guess, you know, the cost, I bought an expensive water heater. It's kind of in the chat. So you can get unitaries from home centers that are really inexpensive. There's certain reasons where the Sandins really shine, and for good reasons, because they don't make noise inside and all that kind of stuff. Cost for me, you know, I have water heater and range and a dryer, maybe $8,000, something like that. One time, bury the cost and then feel good about it. And knowing that you don't have this nagging issue and you're not participating in this climate disaster by burning a fossil fuel. So you know, no question for me, it's early in the budget.
We have one question from Richard. Thoughts on hybrid electric water heaters like Rheem? And does the Sandin one have an indoor and an outdoor unit? Can you speak to those in a little bit more detail?
Yeah. So the Sandin, now these days called Sandco 2, is a split system, which means tanks inside. Sorry, I got to use my hands. And the outdoor unit is outside, and they're connected by water, which means there's a whole thing there, which makes it 2 times more efficient than the Rheem. It uses a benign refrigerant called CO2, which is what we measure global warming with and so forth. It's a lot more money, and the Rheem is totally fine. If you can place the Rheem inside in an area that you won't hear it run, or you can place it in your garage or something like that, Rheem's totally reasonable. There's, I'm working with kind of these larger buildings, a thing called the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, which is West Coast utilities. And so I get to see what's going on with other companies with water heating. What we got today is kind of like what we were looking at about pickups, right? There's lots of really cool things about to spill out into the market. So we'll have a lot more options in heat pump water heaters that'll plug into 110 volt outlets, which will be a game changer for retrofit buildings.
And on that note, I want to just say it's so interesting to see us focused on retrofit examples like the project you just shared, Albert. That's awesome. I was alluding earlier to my project behind me, our house in Tucson, where we also did an all electric retrofit. It was shockingly easy. It really didn't cost that much out of pocket. The solar was the most complicated part, but that's because we were financing it so that it was zero down, and ended up being cash flow positive in the end. So it's exciting when you see realistic budget-wise projects on reasonable houses, because so much of what we see presented so often is these like, here's this amazing passive house mansion we did for $5 million. And it's sweet, don't get me wrong. If I had $5 million, it's what I'd build too. But it's not that accessible, and it really doesn't make that big of a difference, as our friends from Sierra Club and the Washington Physicians Group we're talking about. We got to focus on the retrofit market and making it affordable. So it's so fun to see those examples. And then the other thing that was brought up is looking at when is the right time to take out an existing appliance and put in a new one from a life cycle carbon standpoint. That's a very challenging thing. I'll wrap up with what I'm saying here with, we still have a gas heater in the house. We run it like 10 days a year. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be worth the embodied carbon. It's pretty easy that, knowing the math roughly on this, that there's no way the math's going to work out to say it's worth replacing that until it fails, right? At that point, we do a ducted heat pump because we have ductwork anyway. That'd be easy. So point is, like, you do need to look at those things too. So it is we've turned off our gas, but we still technically have a gas appliance that will probably turn on for like a month next year.
I'd like to just throw something out, just kind of 2 things, like Many contractors these days, certainly in the Washington markets, will try, if you approach them to put in a ductless system or some kind of heat pump, they're going to try, and you have forced air or gas appliance or a gas fireplace insert, they're really going to try and talk you into keeping that there, which is fine. Maybe, you know, when you consider this, you got to be kind of prepared for it and understand really what your goals are. In my goals, it's clearly to remove gas and the meter, right? Disable the house so it's a pain in the rear for someone to put it back into a vehicle that's using gas and so forth. So you have to kind of fight to get it done, but in the end, you know, you can abandon those things, you can cap off the pipe. But I think the important thing right now, as Lucas was talking about, when we've got extreme temperatures, is we just stop burning the fuel. So even if you installed a single zone heat pump in a place, use that fuel, use that appliance, and use the other fuel less. I think that's really one of the goals.
Really well said, really well said. And it is like, it's certainly a critical step that still needs to be achieved to truly be gas free, is exactly what you said. Because if we ever do sell this home, someone can just be like, boop, and all of a sudden the house has some gas again, right? It would be a huge headache to put a gas stove back in after everything we did to get rid of a gas stove to put in an electric stove. So we've got that going for us here, but it'd be, I mean, until we actually switch out the gas heater to a heat pump system and really remove the gas line from the property, I say that we're like not using gas, but we're not a property that's free from gas yet, right? There's like an asterisk on my my statement, and I hate that, but it's like embodied carbon wise, and frankly mostly budget wise, it doesn't make sense at the moment to do that next project. Yeah, but that's how we go, right? It's challenging. Even the professionals in this field, it's hard to actually get this work done well at your own house.
I'll just toss one more relevant factor out. So we also put in solar and a car charger. And one important thing in retrofits is, for us, we have a small, I guess it must be a 200 amp panel, something like that. The important point is, because of induction range, that line was already there. The heat pump water heater could run on a 15 amp 220 circuit. Where I'm going with this is, we didn't run out of panel capacity, which is a big issue with electrification. So it's just something to be aware of as we start electrifying, to be aware of the panel capacity and make some choices around panel capacity. At some point, you have to invest in the electric infrastructure on the home. And it's, you know, it's a good solid choice to do that.
Absolutely. And then, as Grace kept bringing up in the comments section, I think it's worth just mentioning, how do we minimize the embodied carbon and impact of switching that infrastructure, right? If we do move to all electric, all the batteries, all the other stuff, like there's a lot of toxic chemicals used in the production of batteries that are hard to recycle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just how do we manage all this stuff, right?
So one for Willie, any suggestions on how to convert a radiant floor heating system that runs on gas boiler to run on electricity? Sure, that's what that Space Pack 3-ton or 5-ton heat pump is for. It's simply unplug the boiler, set the heat pump outside, run a circuit, put a buffer tank inside, and reconnect the radiant floor system to this buffer tank. Set the controls. You know, if you want to get really tricky, you can make a cold floor, and you could get really tricky and start watching the condensation point in the home. But you can do a little bit of cooling in that floor. You just want to be really careful about how you go about it. So yeah, it's a heat pump. It's there. That's what you can do.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to say something about the battery situation. So we've had lead acid batteries in combustion vehicles for 100 years, whatever. And, you know, 10% is not a non-trivial number, but 90% of batteries, those super toxic lead batteries, are recycled right now. because there's value to that. Now you're talking about the lithium ion, which is they're getting rid of the cobalt in them. They're starting to learn how to get the lithium from the sea. But right now, it's very valuable to recycle that. So there's a lot of incentive for cradle to happen beyond just the concern that, yeah, we're destroying the planet. There's actual economic incentive to do cradle to cradle with the batteries, et cetera. So I don't really foresee that being as ominous a problem as it could be, but in any case, it's a good thing to keep an eye on.
One thing
There's some
that's
talks
pretty
about,
cool.
Sort of persuading homeowners to get off the gas. I find that the gas cooktop is the one they just clutch, with their fingertips, so their hands so tightly. They just will not give up the gas cooking. They just believe that is the only way to cook. The problem is once you get the gas cooktop in the house, you have the gas meter, the gas connection. Puget Sound Energy will give you a free meter, free hookup from the alley, whatever, from the street, including all the trenching, if you do the heater and the water heater, right? It's kind of like, hey, here's this cheap cell phone and we'll get you for your minutes. So you have to really fight this battle at the gas cooktop. And the way you do it is you sell the induction cooktop. And the way to do that is you get them to talk to professional chefs. And fortunately, we did a project for a professional chef who runs a cooking school. She was going to do gas. I had her talk to her friends and colleagues. A week later, she's like, no, I want induction. So that's the way to do it, is sell the induction cooktop, keep the gas out of the house, and you have a fighting chance. Otherwise, Puget Sound Energy is just going to, make it too easy for them.
So it's kind of funny. I live on the edge of the Capitol Forest, and it turns out that nobody even thought to bring gas up here. So my house is all electric from the beginning.
We have a quick question from Grace in regards to the life expectancy of the batteries for electric tools. I don't know, John, if you can speak on that, or if Grace, you have any follow-up questions in regards to that question. But I'm curious too, what the, those batteries, how long they last. What is their life expectancy? Is it you got to charge it every hour, or what would you recommend, John?
I was about to Google that up because there'd be a lot of information there. But my experience is, we started first getting battery powered drills maybe 20 years ago, and those batteries didn't last very long. Whereas now the batteries are lasting much, much longer. They're higher quality and they're expensive. So we take good care of them. And mine last a number of years, but I don't know. I will Google up something on this and report back in another minute or two. Anyone else have some has actually researched this before I go look it up?
I don't know specifics either. I'd have to look that up. I can just speak from experience. I've switched over to a weed eater, DeWalt chainsaw, DeWalt Ego lawnmower, all the batteries. I mean, the DeWalts I've had the longest, but a few years just still doing good. But it is like a cell phone battery that it does degrade over time. So they're not going to stay, as good as they were when they were brand new, but they do last a long time. I haven't had to take any to Home Depot to recycle or anything yet, but works pretty good. I convinced a buddy of mine who has a landscaping company to finally get a DeWalt chainsaw. He's happy with it. Still kind of testing it out, but they've gotten way better than what they used to be. The power, the runtime, it's not perfect, but it's way better than it used to be.
Yeah, I've had an Ego also for about 3 years. I use it fairly heavily. I mow a number of people's lawns and I loan it out to other people in my neighborhood. And I've not seen any capacity drop on my batteries and using the blower, the string trimmer, or the mower.
It's got three.
They are expensive, the mower itself. I got the 21-inch push, and that was like $400. But I never have to take it in to have anything done. I just sharpen the blade, and then that's it. It's all it's all the maintenance, and I like it because it folds down to a really nice compact storage shape.
So I just got 3 sources that said that a typical power tool battery lasts 300 to 500 cycles. I don't know, depends on how much you use it, basically, right?
I just came up with an error source that said 3 to 6 years and about 1,000 cycles. I put that article in the chat section.
Okay, let me know.
Let's look into it.
When they talk about those cycles, they talk about taking it all the way down to fully dead and then back up. If you don't do that, if you keep it well charged and don't go to fully dead every time, you can get a lot more life out of them.
Yeah, that didn't used to be true. You used to have to get them almost all the way drained, or else that it would actually they'd degrade faster. But I think they've improved that now quite a bit.
It used to be very common that you'd see guys on job sites with like some duct tape on their handle so it'd wear out their drill until it was ready to charge. And now I haven't seen that in years and years. I haven't seen any of the batteries come with any suggestion along those lines. So
no, those were for NiCad batteries. They would do that. You had to take them all the way down, or they would have a memory issue.
Can I follow up to my question?
Please.
About the heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. Is there any efficiency cost to having the outside unit a little bit away from the house?
There is not.
There is
on
not.
a split system. Yeah, there's no penalty. No.
Okay. Because I'm a bit disappointed to hear about the noise of something like the ream, because I do have my utility room is right next to the bedroom. But I also don't have a lot of room on each side of the house, so we're coming up with a plan to have a sort of a container or a space for the outside heat pump for the space heating, kind of away from the house, together with place for the trash cans. So I'm glad that's okay. But now if I would get something like the sand, and then I would have to have two external units out there, I guess, and spend a lot more money.
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately you would. Not that this is relevant probably to your situation, but there have been kind of larger systems that try to do all three, heating and cooling and domestic hot water. It's a big ask for them. And that's how you would get back to one unit. And they haven't done that well. So yeah, we are entering an era where there's going to be multiple condensers outside the building now for a while, until future iterations kind of consolidate that back. If you run into trouble, we have worked with a couple of municipalities in Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia, where that Sanco 2, that particular one, runs at 37 dB, which is literally a whisper. So you can place it places that you normally can't put an air-to-air heat pump, because they will run in the 50s, and 40s to 50s are pretty loud. And that is kind of part of the issue about where you're allowed to place those. It's kind of fire and noise is what kind of drives that. So yeah, hopefully that works out.
Yeah, I was just reading, after you mentioned that, I was reading a thread on Green Building Advisor, and it seemed like the reams used to be quiet, but someone was saying the later models got noisier. And I sort of wonder if there are other brands besides. I know you sell the Sandon, and it's very highly regarded, but I wonder if there are any other brands that you or anyone else can mention that might be sufficiently quiet.
I would tell you if I knew. I'm not as up. The issue is like, what is noisy, right? Because there'll be a noise rating at the unit, but it is all about kind of your home and your own sensitivity. So, but having a little noise isn't the end of the world. It might go away after a while, and just these are things that are always hard to solve. And then I'm going to even do something even strange. I'm putting my outdoor unit in my basement. And yes, it will rob heat from the house, but it won't rob much. And it'll pick up some efficiency because in the winter, I won't have that low ambient temperature, which means my COP will float a little bit higher. And I just don't, I mean, I already ran through the horrible rat infested crawl space to pull the gas line out. And an old guy like me doesn't want to crawl in there again to run the water line. So down in the basement it goes, where I can look at it and smile because it'll rob a few BTUs, but there it is. That's cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Laura was also bringing up a good point around, you know, potentially insulating the walls adjacent to the mechanic room and bedroom. I'd recommend probably a higher density insulation for that application because you're trying to fight against a probably lower pitch pump type noise, I would imagine. Albert, I wish the answer, I wish I could help there too, you know, like I'm trying to think. All the heat pump water heaters that are like the single units, there's the heat pump built into the unit, right? So that's where the noise comes from. Sandon's relatively unique in separating the compressor, condenser, putting it outside, in water heaters. I don't know, it'd be wonderful to see other products out there like that, but Sandon's pretty darn unique, especially being CO2, refrigerant, and outdoor. In our work, it's what we always kind of start with, is what we hope people do. Even in my own house, it's what I started with. I hope I could do it, but I couldn't. So a little extra solar with a standard electric water heater, and you know what? We're stoked. We've got plenty of hot water. It's powered by solar. The water heater costs $300. Awesome.
I agree, and yeah, I sell the Sandon and I love selling them, but you know, it's the right tool for the right job, and it's not the right tool for every job.
Yeah.
And there's affordability and equity issues. There's just lots of other issues, and we just need more and more heat pump water heaters of various shapes and sizes.
To note too is we chose to do the standard electric water heater for now, with the goal of having a second electric car later. So that electric car is that standard electric water heater is taking up a good deal of energy, which eventually we plan to switch that out to a Sandon, right? Bring down our energy use with the same amount of solar we have and be able to fit an electric car into our energy production portfolio, if you will. We produce a certain amount of renewables. We want to live within that energy portfolio. And right now we couldn't get a second car to do that, right? Right now we're charging our Volt. We can get 60 miles on that. We need to get a lot of extra capacity. So that's going to the heat pump, air conditioning, somatic insulation, right? And obviously the heat pump water heater situation. What I didn't want to do is invest too much money in a kind of halfway solution, right? Like let's use CFL bulbs. People, you know, changed whole houses to CFLs, pulled those out, put in LEDs, right? I know I want a Sandon. I know that's what I want. I know I don't like high impact refrigerants. So I'm not going to put those into my house because that's a whole embodied carbon nightmare. Just as bad as natural gas. You're tying yourself into a refrigerant pipeline that's horrible when you're using a lot of standard heat pump technology. That's actually the other reason I didn't want to bring it up earlier because I only had 5 minutes, but that's the whole other reason we haven't switched out to a heat pump system for our house. Is I'm waiting for something to come out that's better, a lot better, as far as embodied carbon of refrigerant it uses for both heating and cooling the space.
You know, boy, it's super great. I don't want to dominate the conversation, so if anybody has anything to say, please just push me out of the way.
Albert and I can't talk all night about this.
Well, I thought I was under the impression that CO2 wasn't capable of doing cooling.
Not well.
No, CO2 is not capable of doing cooling. But what he's saying is like that first slide that I showed, the Midea, which is the same as Daikin, Mitsubishi, and so forth. That's all R410 refrigerant, and all those pipes from outdoors going to all the heads indoors are literally filled with refrigerant. And the reason we took on the next heat pump, Space Pack, is kind of what George was considering with his house. Is we want to put a heat pump outside, and then we want to use water to run into the slab floor or into whatever the emitter is in the house. And therefore, now we get rid of all those refrigerants. Today, right now, there are a few refrigerants that are coming on that will be much better than the current R410A. And the Space Pack is kind of like this midterm step that I'm really, really committed to, because if you look at a house with 5 heads and mini splits, that's becoming pretty common right now. You're looking at a high GWP refrigerant of, 1,500 to 2,000 GWP or something like that. And you've got a few liter bottles in it. And when you move that to a monoblock where it's just the heat pump sitting outside and then the connection is water, then now you've reduced the amount of refrigerant that's in the entire system. And now it's a factory sealed environment. The issue with mini splits is that all those refrigerant connections are site made by various by various skills in installation, and they leak. And when your heat pump doesn't work, it's not cooling anymore, it's not heating anymore, you call the guy up and they bring out that funny pink bottle and they pump more high GWP refrigerant in there because yours already leaked out. And that's a really, really bad thing. That's what the Tagagi protocol was all about, to get rid of the bad refrigerants. And we're just having a hard time getting the new refrigerants in. Ultimately, the best thing that we could do with heat pumps is reduce the amount of refrigerant and use hydronic systems, which we've done for about 100 years. And we're pretty good at hydronics. We know how it works. And when it leaks water and maybe some glycol. And boy, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Well, it just happens though that last Wednesday I was in Bellevue in a 10-story condo, $750 to $1 million condos that have a hydronic system, and they've all started to fail. And we're talking about thousands of dollars in water damage. So we're looking at doing a solution there. But anything that can leak, even water, especially if it's in a high volume area, is still problematic. And it had to do with the installation, the skills that you're talking about, people putting them in, not necessarily doing the right thing,
I think that risk always exists, but the reason I like hydronics and refrigerants is it's the only way you get COP, right? And the only way we're going to scale population over utility, if we're not going to correct the envelopes, which we're not really doing right now, is to rely on COP on fuel. And, so that's a heat pump. And if the heat pump's got a bad refrigerant, then reduce the bad refrigerant in favor of something that will stain your drywall, and shame on you, don't let it leak. Sorry, I'm a little
no, it's so
easy with other people's money.
Not to be overly harsh, but failure in a multi-million-dollar condo complex with some hydronic water leak issues versus that being a leak that's screwing over the entire planet. I'd rather have it be the water leak, like that's fixable. You can't go vacuum up that refrigerant and be like, oops, sorry, climate change, sorry, future generations, our bad, right?
Well, their solution is going to have no refrigerants whatsoever. So
yeah, no, but I love
retrofit.
That idea of keeping the refrigerant within basically a professionally produced system. And then allowing connections to be water components, because frankly, we're really good at water component connections in the field in comparison to refrigerant connections in the field. That's something our industry can handle.
Yeah. So, hey, George, it's all about getting rid of the gas for me. So if
Oh,
you
sure.
got
Yeah.
if you got a solution that
I do.
fuel switches, man, it's all good with me. I'm the heat pump guy, so I see it from the heat pump angle, and doesn't
No,
mean
we actually looked at whether or not that would be a good solution for them. They had very narrow balconies. They had no place to put the unit, and they were condos, so everybody kind of had to come up with their own solution. So that the heat pump actually doesn't end up being a solution for them. And they already had the places to install the infrared. So
yep,
But
right
I
tool.
guess the point I really want to emphasize is